Hello friends, welcome to the second day of DotVVM Virtual Conference 2021. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I hope that you enjoyed the stream we had yesterday. So if you are new to DotVVM, check out the beginning of our yesterday's stream, because I was explaining what is DotVVM, how you can use it to build new web apps, and how you can use it to modernize old ASP.NET Web Forms applications and getting them to the latest versions of .NET. So what's on our agenda for today? So first, I will be showing a short demo of how you can use Fluent UI web components with .VVM. Fluent UI is a Microsoft's framework. It's a design framework, and you know all those UI elements and buttons and styles from Microsoft applications like Office 365 and Azure Portal and many more. So you will see how to use the same components, same looking components in your .VVM applications. Then we have two sessions from our developer advocates. First is .VVM in action on ML.NET from Daniel Gomez. And also we have a session about CI/CD pipelines using GitHub Actions from our advocate Vincent Noach. And finally, I will close this conference with a short session about what are plans for .VVM 4 and what features you can look forward to in our next release. And I will be showing some demos because some of the things already work. So let's jump into the first session about web components. So what is a web component? Basically, it's not a single standard. It's basically a combination of features introduced in the HTML specification, which allows library and component authors to create universal component that can be used from any framework. Basically, it's the main features which allow this are these two. First is a JavaScript API, which allows you to define custom HTML elements. So you can define, like the Fluent UI team has defined, the Fluent select element, and this element is not transpiled to anything else, like if you use .vvm components or something like that, but this is just sent to the browser, and because of this script that is imported in the page header, the browser will know how to react to this control, to this HTML element. Yeah, so it will know that if it finds the Fluent select element, it has to do something like this. Yeah, so the first part of this standard is an API which allows to define custom HTML elements and how these elements should behave. And the second piece of this puzzle is a shadow DOM, document object model, and basically it allows the browser to or the component to specify how this element should look like. Yeah, so in the HTML page there will be the Fluent select element, yeah, like in this example, but what is being rendered will be some divs with some CSS classes and other hierarchy inside, and that's called shadow DOM because it's not in the real DOM of the page, but it is what the browser will be rendering. Yeah, so these two features allows a lot of people to create their own elements and define how they will be rendered. And this is great for all component authors because they can create components universally for any framework, and they don't need to care about if people are using React or Angular or .vvm or any other web technology, because this is just a feature of HTML and it's supported in all major browsers today. So how does this look? Actually, I have two projects, so I need to go to correct Visual Studio. Okay, this should be it. Okay, so I have a sample application, and to demonstrate the foundations, I have a plain page which basically it's using .vvm, but it's not using anything else than master pages. So basically I have a plain .HTML page which includes this script type module in the header you can see it's a Fluent UI package web component. It's going from a CDN, so it's even not downloaded in my project, which is a little bit dangerous because if they change the version, this will always give you the latest version, so they can be breaking changes. But you can see this element, which is defined by the Fluent UI scripts. So this element will tell the browser to do something. We will see it in a minute. Basically, it includes some CSS styles required by the Fluent UI components. And then, as you can see, I'm just using plain HTML elements. This will work in any framework because it's just HTML. The framework doesn't touch these elements. DotVVM isn't aware about this element. For DotVVM, it's just a regular HTML element, so it will just be passed through to the browser. Yeah? So this is Fluent text field, and it's basically a text box control which ships with basic styles and some features you might expect. There is also Fluent checkbox, which is a nice styled checkbox. You can see that I'm setting checked to true. Yeah, so you can interact with these controls using HTML attributes, and it will work. This is the Fluent select. It's what you already saw in the slides. Yeah, so it's a select drop-down list where you can pick one of these options, and there are two buttons. First has the appearance equal to accent. There are defined, the Fluent UI defines several appearances for the components, so you can choose which one you want. So this accent will be emphasized with accent color, which is parameterizable, so you can specify your own. There's some default one, and this will be just neutral button. Yeah, so this is it's basically, if you have been using Bootstrap, this is similar, yeah, like the primary button in Bootstrap. Yeah, but they call this accent. Yeah. So this is a very simple page, and if I open it, you can see it looks like this. I have zoomed the page in, so you don't need to worry. The components are not so large by default. And you can recognize these styles because if you look in the Azure portal, the controls look very similar or practically the same. Yeah, so this is text box. You can see it's highlighted when it gets focused. This is the select. It supports disabled elements, so this second option is disabled, so you can see it changed my cursor and it's in gray. And this is nice style checkbox. It's looking better than the default one. Yeah, so these are basic components with some styles. And if you look in the web, in the DevTools console, you will see that it looks a little bit weird. But for example, here we have the Fluent text field. Yeah, so this is this text box control. Yeah, and you can see that I can close this. So you can see that in the HTML tree, this is just Fluent text field, so the element really lives in the page, but there is some shadow root, which is the shadow DOM I have been talking about, and this is what the browser will actually render. Yeah? So it will render a label, it will render some div with some styles, and the text box is composed from these elements. But if you would try to, for example, enumerate the elements using JavaScript, you won't see them because these are not part of the real DOM. These are part of the shadow DOM. So this is what the browser is rendering, but it's not in the object tree of the page, in the default, in the root object tree in the page. Yeah, so this is pretty nice. And you can change these attributes. So for example, if I change the appearance to something else, the control would change its style. And for example, we have this Fluent Design System provider, which ships some default CSS styles in the page. And it also can be set with some parameters. So for example, I can add an attribute like accent color, accent base color. I hope the name is correct because there's no IntelliSense, unfortunately. So if I would like to change the accent color, I can do it like this. Yeah, so you set the attribute on this Fluent Design System provider, and all controls inside will inherit this style. And what you can also do is you can to change the back color, and it's even more interesting because, for example, if I set background color equals to 0, 6 zeros, so this will make the background black. And the controls are quite powerful and intelligent, because if they detect they are on the dark background, they will change and recalculate the other colors. Yeah, so if I change the background color, you can see that now the texts are black. So when I change this, the texts turned to white, because the styles inside the controls are intelligent, and based on the background color they can adapt so the texts are still visible. And of course you can override these colors to some other colors you like, but if you just want to enable a dark mode in your application, it's in default, it's as easy as to set the background color to 0, and most of the controls will just recalculate their colors, so it will still look pretty nice. Yeah, so of course it's this application, it would be nicer if this Fluent Design System provider would include also the menu and things like that, because this looks quite weird, but still it's quite nice that you can change these things. And you can change it, as you can see, you can change it without reloading the page. So if I fix this, yeah, now I'm still back in the light mode. Yeah, so this is what the controls can do, and it's pretty impressive. And because they are natural HTML elements, any framework can interact with them. So these controls are based on a framework which is also developed by Microsoft. It's called FAST, and it allows you to build any web components using TypeScript. They have a lot of syntax helpers, because the native JavaScript API for defining the web components is not very, it's very low level. So this framework gives a better abstraction on this, and it's quite easy to define components. You can look at the GitHub of Fluent UI team how they do it, but it looks very easy to do, and it's nicely maintainable. So basically anyone can build these web components either using the pure API or using frameworks like FAST, and it will work in every framework that can manipulate with HTML DOM elements, because the Fluent text field is just an HTML element, and even DotVVM can work with these elements. It can hide them using visible property, it can bind values from the view model to HTML attributes, and a lot of other things. So it's pretty powerful, and it can be used from DotVVM. So if you are interested in how the Fluent UI controls are implemented, you can go to the GitHub of Fluent UI. You need to go to the web components package. It's not in the root, because the Fluent UI has multiple implementations for each platform, and the web components version is currently in progress. Not all components that are supported by Fluent UI are actually ported to web components, but the team is working on it, so it's getting better and better. Yeah? And if you go to SRC, you can see all the components which are there. And if you look in, for example, this index.ts, you can see how these components are implemented. So basically, it's some class with some annotations which tell the framework, okay, this will be the name of the element, and you can see all these properties which are here, some definition of styles. And here in the fixtures, they have the usage of these controls, so you can see how the controls can be used in the pure HTML. Currently there is no documentation, but I guess they are working on it, but from these fixtures and from the source code you can see what the components actually support. So this is not perfect, it's still in progress, but it was very easy to start working with that. And if you don't like to create your own styles, this is a nice package which ships with nice looking styles. Okay, so how to use it in DotVVM? Basically, DotVVM can do a lot of things with custom elements. So you can use the data binding. For example, if you want to bind a text on a button, you can just use value binding. It will just work. Yeah? And we have the universal click event handler, which you can use on the buttons. So it won't be just click equals something. You will need to use events.click, but it basically renders on click equals some JavaScript, which is fine for even for the Fluent button. What's a little bit more complicated is a two-way data binding, because the controls, when you change their attributes, these changes are propagated into the control, and control will respond to them. So you have seen that I added the background color attribute on the Fluent design system provider, and the component detected the change and changed the styles. Yeah. But when the control itself changes its attribute, by default, nobody is notified about this change. And of course, DotVVM relies on these notifications. So for example, if you want to bind to text box, you will need a custom binding handler that will be able to detect that the text value was actually changed. Yeah? And that's what you don't need to implement, because we have implemented it for you, and it's part of the sample application, so you can use it freely in your apps. And we basically had to write our own replacement of this value binding, which will provide also the way back. Yeah? So let's look how it works. So I have a second page, and let's open it in the browser. So you can see this is the progress bar control. So you can use the standard binding to the value of progress bar, because the progress bar itself cannot change its values. It just reads the value and displays something, but the user has no way to interact with the browser. Yeah, you can curse that this operation is taking a long time, but that's the only, you cannot still change the value of the progress bar directly. Yeah? But this is the numeric up down, where the user can change the values. So here for this second control, we need to be able to observe changes and to write them back to the view model. And if we write them back to the view model, the other controls will just respond to that, thanks to the default value binding, which is in Knockout. So let's look at the source code. You can see that for the progress control, I have used the normal value binding. And for the number field, I had to use this fast.bind dash value equals and then value binding. And this prefix, yeah, this is the same. This value is the same as this, because it's the name of the attribute of the Fluent number field. It has the value attribute. And this is just an attached property group, which will take this value binding, and it won't render the standard attr binding from Knockout.js. It will replace it with our own binding handler. If you are interested how it works, we have basically implemented the bind event handler. So we have the fast bind binding handler, and we are using the observable class from the Microsoft Fast framework. Yeah, because the Fluent UI web components are written on top of this Fast framework. So we are getting the observable get notifier for elements, and this notifier will tell us, okay, this property has been changed. Yeah, and basically when we find that this property has been changed, we just subscribe to it and write the new value in the expression in the value binding. Yeah, so that's what we will do. So instead of a value equals binding, you need to write fast.bind dash value equals binding, and the second way will just work. Yeah, so this is what you need to do. But as you can see, it works, because when I'm changing the value here, the progress bar is actually rising. Yeah. Similarly, I can use the fast bind to the checked property of the checkbox, and then use the visible binding as normally as you are used to. So I can do this. Yeah, because also this two-way binding allows to detect the change in the control and write it back in the view model. Yeah. And this is just button. Yeah, you can see the first button has the accent appearance, the second button is neutral, that's why the first one is blue, the second one is just gray. And you can see that I'm just using events.click, which you can use on any HTML element, including this Fluent button, and it will just work. Yeah. So this is also nice. And what about binding collections? In Fluent UI, there are many controls that expect a collection of elements. For example, we have seen the select. So if you want to create a select, you need to build these elements for each item of this control, of this drop-down list. So, and we have also a way how to do it in .vvm, and it's called repeater. Yeah? So we can create, instead of the Fluent select, we can render a repeater, and we will need to tell it, okay, wrapper tag name is Fluent select. This means that .vvm will render the Fluent select element, and the item template, which is this, will be just placed inside this wrapper tag. Yeah, so it will render the same thing as we have here on the top. The only problem is that you need to render it on the server. So you need to set render settings mode equals server. Otherwise, the elements would appear in the Fluent select too late. So the Fluent, because the page would be loaded and there will be just this template element. And after Knockout.js is initialized, then this will be expanded to the individual options. But it's too late for Fluent UI. So right now you need to use the render settings mode equals server, so .vvm will render this collection on the server, and this will work. There can be some issues if you change these items later. If you want, for example, on a postback, if you want to change these items, you will also need to include postback.update equals true. So the control will be re-rendered on every postback. This will help you if you want to change the items dynamically in the control. However, we have found an issue that while the controls are being replaced, this selected value property is being reset. So you also need to store this selected value somewhere, because once the options disappear, this property will be reset. So that's what we think that we will need to implement some other special kind of binding, like we have fast bind. So we will also have to have something like fast for each or fast collection, where we could do this more cleverly, not just using repeater, but still it works. So if the list in the control is static and doesn't change on postbacks, then it's pretty safe to use it. And you can see these controls are bound to the same property, so it's synchronized. Yeah, the first is just hard-coded items, and the second is created by a repeater, and both of the controls actually work. So this is pretty nice. And also I'm binding to the value, and I'm using the two-way binding, so whenever the user changes the value, it will be written back to the view model. Yeah, so this is nice. I needed to create my own Fluent UI bundle, because in my binding handler I'm importing the observable class from the fast framework. So basically I created a very simple pipeline for a rollup that basically just, sorry, now this is the generated script. That basically it imports Fluent UI components, adds my binding handler to the package, initializes it, and exports the Fluent UI components back. So I'm just extending this library, and it works pretty well. So this is how you can use these components, and they have quite a lot of controls. So I recommend to explore this repo, and there are new controls being added every few days, so it's very nice. And I hope that they will soon cover all the controls supported by Fluent UI, because right now some controls are missing. For example, there is still no date time picker here, but they have the React version of Fluent UI components, and it contains the date picker. So I expect that it's only a matter of time until they take this date picker and use it here in the Fluent UI package. So this is the current status. Current version is 0.22, so you can see it's still work in progress. I think that for any real production use, we will have to wait until the version 1. And there are actually, or I haven't found any documentation if there is. So I'm sorry, but I haven't found it. But the source code is pretty nice and it's nicely readable. There are the fixtures which show the usage of the controls. So it's good enough at least to start to try the package. And of course, there are some controls missing. There is a grid, for example, but it doesn't have all the features, but they're still working on it. And if you look in the pull requests on the repo, there's a lot of work in progress, so it's getting better. I think it's a good thing to watch this library because it looks very promising, and I personally really like that it's universal. It will work with every web framework because otherwise it's kind of problematic for .vvm because we have, for example, the React bridge, so there is a possibility to use React controls in our app, but because you are combining two frameworks, there is some performance overhead. You need to load more scripts, and so this is always a better option. Okay, the only problem with the Fluent UI web components or web components in general is that it's difficult for IDEs to get enough metadata to give you a reasonable IntelliSense. Yeah, so for example, if you use the Fluent progress element, there needs to be something that will tell Visual Studio, okay, this element supports these attributes, and these attributes have the following limitations, like the min value of the Fluent progress can only be a number. Yeah, the code in the Fluent UI is annotated, so I think that there will be a way to provide this metadata, but right now I haven't seen any way how you can actually get IntelliSense for it. It's technically possible, and I believe that in the future it will be available, but right now it's not. And of course there are some required attributes. For example, using the progress bar without specifying the value doesn't make much sense, and the control probably wouldn't work well. So also you need or you want a validation like that. And of course I have shown how to use this in .vvm, but it's also not very convenient. You don't want to use repeater for every select control. So we are looking for providing some wrappers over Fluent UI that will be natural to use. For example, you have .vvm has a type system for control wrappers, and it can do validation of attributes. So if we build wrappers in .vvm, then you will get a nice IntelliSense with all the validations. So for example, the batch control will tell you that you need to specify the text, that the text is required property. We can do this with .vvm, so it's only a matter of writing good wrappers over the controls. We can also validate control usage in the hierarchy of elements. For example, if you use accordion control, .vvm can restrict the inner elements to be just the accordion items and nothing else. Yeah. Also, this is what .vvm is capable of. Or for example, we can add the data source and item template properties. So if you want to use accordion control, but you don't have the static accordion items, you want to generate them from some collection in the view model, this will be possible thanks to the wrappers. So we are looking into creating wrappers over Fluent UI. It will still take some time because there are some controls that are missing, and we think that without, for example, datetime picker, it doesn't much make a lot of sense to use it in apps because this is a crucial control for us. But I think that in a few months this will be available, so we are looking into a way how to provide wrappers. And we have already started doing an experiment for some control wrappers. So, and I will be showing it because it's also related to .vvm4, so I will be showing it on the at the end of the conference. But this is how it will look like. Don't matter the IntelliSense because it's work in progress. But the Fluent tabs control, it will be able to make sure that this property is also set. and also inside this control you will be able to use just this controls and nothing else. Yeah, so that's what we are looking, this is the kind of experience we want to provide. And also, if the tabs are bound from a data source, you will have another option what you can do, and it will be just using the data source. So you will be able to say data source equals tabs collection, and you will probably be able to say something like item header text binding equals, and you will be able to provide a binding to bind this header text. So for example, each object in the collection will have the title. Yeah, so this will be put here, and we will just say item template, and this can be just the inner content of this tab. So you can, of course, and you will probably be binding values or using other controls like here. So this could be a second usage of this control, and I think it really fits the way how DotVVM works in the control with the controls. I can see a lot of similarities with Bootstrap, which are also doing these kind of things, and in DotVVM we have similar wrappers. So if the Fluent UI web components package is getting more popular, you can expect that DotVVM will offer wrappers over these controls too. So that's what I wanted to share about the Fluent UI web components, and after a break you will see Daniel's session about ML.NET and DotVVM. So stay tuned.